on the News Channel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Commissioners Council.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on Open Line. Tonight we're talking DUI crashes, especially with the Super Bowl weekend. So what are some statistics? How many DUI arrests were made last year and how many crashes occurred in the state?
Well, last year THP alone made 124 DUI arrests during Super Bowl weekend. We investigated over 1,402 crashes across the state, and out of those crashes there were 75 individuals who were drunk or under the influence of alcohol and or drugs. So with that being said, it's a huge problem for the state. This is a big time to celebrate and have a good time and to party, but it's not the time to drink and drive. That is never the time. So always designate a driver. That's what one thing we will all agree on today, is to designate a driver and just keep the roadways safe.
You always hear the term booze it or lose it. Can you tell us what the Tennessee Highway Patrol is doing to keep drivers safe this Super Bowl weekend?
So the Tennessee Highway Safety Office is executing its Booze It and Lose It campaign this weekend, where you'll see an increase in high visibility enforcement. There will be a lot more officers on the road. Certain areas will be doing sobriety checkpoints and saturation patrols. So there will be a higher presence, and what that means is we encourage the motoring public and our citizens to be very careful this weekend. And if you're at a Super Bowl party, and you have a designated driver, great. And if you don't, just choose to spend the night or use those ride-sharing apps to get home, or a taxi service. That's one thing that we just really want to drive home with this campaign.
From a medical perspective, last year, is it Super Bowl one of those things where a lot of people are being called into the trauma department? Do you have to say, hey, we need you guys to come in? What type of things, driving-wise, do you see?
Well, certainly, with the increase in arrests, there's certainly increase in accidents. We tend to call them crashes because they were most likely preventable, and driving drunk is one of those things that you can absolutely prevent. So we all actually stay in the hospital. But we definitely spend a lot more time coming down to the emergency department, a lot more time seeing folks. It's sometimes hard to predict. We can hope that the accidents aren't bad enough to need our services, but unfortunately, they usually spike up during those times.
So this is just in my experience reporting. I'm not really sure the validity to it, but it seems like sometimes when we're covering someone who might be impaired, whether it's drugs or alcohol, and they get involved in a crash with someone who isn't, it seems like sometimes the DUI driver ends up maybe surviving if it's a fatal. Last year, were there any fatal accidents like that?
Last year we had 8 fatalities across the state during Super Bowl weekend. Thank goodness none of those fatalities were alcohol related. Now we did have, out of those 8, we did have 3 individuals who were killed by not wearing their seatbelt. So we don't ever want to miss an opportunity to talk about making sure that you click that seatbelt. That is the #1 safety tool that you have in your vehicle for your safety and really for the safety of everyone else, because if you're in your seat and you're in control and you're safely secured, you're less likely to have an incident inside your vehicle that could contribute out across the roadway somewhere else. But we did have eight people killed last year out of those 1,402 crashes that we had, and that's 8 people too many.
What should be a fun weekend filled with, eating good food, you don't want it to turn into something like a tragedy like that. What are some preventative measures that people can take while they're at their Super Bowl party? Is it schedule a lift in advance, or what do you guys recommend? Well, there's numerous things that you can do. First of all, we really say plan ahead, designate a driver, or plan ahead and have your app set up to where you can have a safe ride come pick you up, a share ride, and use alternative means of transportation. Do not get in your vehicle and try to drive. If you're buzz driving, that's drunk driving. We cannot drive at home enough, and that's not okay to get in your car and drive. So make sure that you plan ahead with your designated driver. Make it fun for them. Take them and treat them to a night out on the town. Buy their dinner, buy their soft drinks. Take care of them. Have no expense to your designated driver, because really at the end of the night your designated driver is going to take care of you and get you home safely, and you'll avoid all the heartache of going to jail and
and losing so much more than just a night in jail. You can lose your job, you can lose your life. There's so many things that can happen if you attempt to drive drunk.
Now, either of you guys can answer this, but say you're at a party and you don't really know what to do. There's that one person who maybe had one too many. Do you have any tips for a way to say, look, maybe, you know, let me call you an Uber? What's a good idea or a way to handle that type of situation?
Well, we always say, you know, last resort, take the keys. You know, if you know that somebody has had too many to drink and they're belligerent or rowdy or just out of control, if you need to call law enforcement, but you know, the best thing that you can do as that homeowner and the host of the party is to take that public safety seriously and the safety of that person seriously. And if you allow that person to leave your house, to get in their vehicle and leave, you potentially could be held liable. So, you know, as that individual who's hosting the party, you've got to be the one that's most responsible and be in control.
I think there's a pretty easy test. If you had alcohol, you probably shouldn't drive. And just make it that simple. You know, it can be really easy. You have one drink, you think you can set limits, your decision making goes down certainly, and you're having a good time, and one leads to another, and you know, no one, I should say very few people get up in the morning and intend to drive drunk and intend to cause an accident. And it's just one of those things that the best way to do it is just to not do it.
And if I could also state, there's one area that is typically overlooked by so many during Super Bowl weekend and during parties in general. Do not contribute to the delinquency of a minor. It's never okay to give a juvenile alcohol and feel like it's okay they're in a supervised environment. That's not the case. They're a juvenile, and like Arielle alluded to, you can be held liable for your actions. If you allow someone to leave your home regardless of their age, and if they're under the influence of alcohol and you know that, then you will also be charged with whatever charges that they're being charged with, whether it be DUI, you can be charged with DUI. If they crash and kill someone and it's a vehicular homicide, you can be charged with that as well. So be the adult, be the responsible friend and host, and don't let anyone leave your home if they've been drinking.
And 16-year-old drivers learning how to drive definitely don't need to do that. I remember those days when, you know, driving's hard, you're learning, and obviously that's a terrible mix to put together.
Very much so.
So what do you guys think is a way to get the fatality numbers down? You said 8 people had passed away. Will there be more state troopers on the roads? Kind of how many more can you numberize that?
Well, we have nearly 1,000 state troopers across the state of Tennessee, but the way we operate our shifts is we'll use predictive analytics to see when and where the troopers are needed by past historical events. Obviously, we know the Super Bowl's coming, and we know that it's going to be a significant event for us, and we know obviously the time that the Super Bowl is going to be being played. So we can schedule our shifts around the hours of the Super Bowl, before and after, to make sure we have maximum amount of presence out on the roadway. It's a zero tolerance type of weekend. We'll be looking for everything such as your headlight being out on your car. That's a probable cause reason to stop you, to make sure that you're not a drunk driver. If you're speeding, if you're driving reckless or hazardously, if you're not wearing your seatbelt, if you're crossing in and out of the lanes, kind of having erratic type of driving moves, then we're going to stop you. Troopers will be out. The #1 goal is to make the highways in Tennessee as safe as possible. So we want 0 fatalities, and we know we can do that through education and awareness first. And that's the #1 thing. We need to make every driver in this state aware. They need to self-educate on the laws and the dangers and hazards, because the time to meet us is not the time that you want to meet us. And we're very serious. The tone has changed. The tone is changing. If you drink and drive, you're going to pay the consequences. There's 0 tolerance because this is a crime that's being violated. We're very passionate about enforcing DUI laws, because it's a crime that will affect anyone at any given time. There's no one who is exempt from a drunk driver. There's no one exempt from the dangers and hazards that can come from a drunk driver. So we will be out in force.
What is the law? You guys might be able to speak to this as well, regarding DUIs, blood tests, breathalyzer. Kind of how does that stand at this point? I heard there was a Supreme Court ruling saying that if you are legally drunk, you can't give consent to a blood test anymore. I don't know if that's still valid, but there's a lot of discussion surrounding blood test and the breathalyzer. What are people's rights and what could they get if they were pulled over?
You can simply refuse, yes, you can refuse a blood alcohol test, breathalyzer test, or a toxicology test by using blood or breath. Also, the law enforcement officer, he or she has the right to secure a search warrant. And that's what we, excuse me, as an agency, that is what we're doing. We are encouraging our troopers to secure a search warrant going through the judicial system, and that evidence can be secured and safely stored, because that blood alcohol content or that drug content in your blood, that is evidence. And if you have committed a crime such as vehicular homicide or vehicular assault, a lesser offense, and there's someone that's been injured, that is evidence that is critical for the prosecution in that case. And it helps the families and give them closures as well.
From a medical perspective, on Super Bowl weekend, do you see a lot of pedestrian vehicle crashes? Do you see more car versus car crashes? Kind of what are you guys seeing into the ER on a Super Bowl?
Well, I would say the majority of what we'd see would be either automobile on automobile or on automobile and motorcycle crashes. We certainly do see pedestrian versus auto crashes, or pedestrians struck by automobiles. Fortunately, those are usually a little bit lower speed, usually in more crowded areas, not always. But around the Super Bowl, around the times of big gatherings, that's normally what it would be. And certainly a driver, a pedestrian who's intoxicated can be very erratic and walk out into the street and get hit by a car. And the driver wasn't expecting it, wasn't doing anything, maybe wasn't under the influence. So it really, even if you're the pedestrian at the bar, know your limits, respect your limits, have people with you that you can make sure can make good decisions for you, so that you're not putting other people in danger, whether it's physical danger or just the emotional danger of actually hitting someone.
If you guys are just tuning in, you can call in and these guys will answer your questions at 615-737-PLUS. We're going to go to the commercial break and we'll come back and talk more about DUIs and reckless driving.